Now, the World Bank expects South Africa's economic growth for 2020 to remain below 1%. The Washington-based lender lists electricity supply constraints as one of the reasons restraining growth prospects. In its latest Global Economic Prospects report, the World Bank says that growth is expected to edge to below 1% at 0.9%, and this is up from an estimated 0.4% in 2019. The bank says that 0.9% projection assumes that government's reform agenda gathers pace and policy uncertainty is addressed and investment gradually recovers. The World Bank expects infrastructure constraints, especially in electricity supply, to inhibit domestic growth. Eskom continues to struggle to keep the lights on, with stage 2 load shedding extended to tomorrow morning. Now, the power utility says that it has lost additional generation capacity with breakdowns of over 14,000 megawatts. It also says that emergency reserves are also insufficient to meet the demand for electricity during the day. All right, well, to unpack all of this and what that number means, I'm now joined in the studio by our analyst. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Isaiah, this is, let's start with this shocking revelation, of course, by the Deputy President. I'm not sure if you heard. He said that he heard that the President was misled in terms of blackouts and load shedding to January the 13th. What do you make of that? Because at the heart of it is the economic story.
Absolutely. I think we were a little bit too over-optimistic ourselves as well to expect no load shedding without the guaranteed maintenance of the Eskom plants, power plants. We've had load shedding for quite some time. So anybody that comes and guarantees the provision of electricity, I think that is a little bit too overstretched. And I think this is one of the issues that the World Bank report points out to say the availability of electricity to South African companies and the economy as a whole is one of the binding constraints for economic growth. And without that certainty, you are unlikely to see big companies coming to invest in the country, because if you don't have certainty of energy, you can't really operate. So that's one of the binding constraints. But there are several others that also impedes on economic growth, one of which is global economic growth, still very low this year compared to last year, 2.4, 2.5%, which is going to hold South Africa's exports lower than what they would. And again, we have already decoupled from global growth for quite some time.
Well, let's unpack it all now. I mean, on the face of it, some might say if growth was 0.4% last year and we're going to get 0.9%, that's double the situation last year. So is that not saying we're moving in the right direction?
Look, 0.4, 0.5% is a very minute improvement. For an economy that has a population growth that is above 2%, you need at least 2.6% economic growth for our debt to GDP ratio to stabilize. That's one of the big issues that we have this year. Moody's is going to come with a credit rating announcements on the 20th of March after the budget, which means if the budget does not announce significant cuts in spending or structural reforms that are going to be implemented such that the outlook for our debt trajectory improves, we are going to be downgraded. So 0.4 to 0.9, it's irrelevant. I think what is important is what is going to be done to take that 0.9 to at least above 2% economic growth that is going to generate enough tax revenues for national trade.
So the World Bank was saying that 2021-22 will get up to 1.4%, and that's still not enough, and that's 2-3 years away. The National Development Plan talks about 5 to 6% required. So we're in the middle of the longest downward cycle in economic terms since 1945, I believe. We haven't grown 2% since 2013. All this is painting as doom and gloom. And yet the population keeps growing, as you say, at the speed of light. What can we do?
Look, I think the National Treasury Economic Strategy paper have highlighted what needs to be done. Economic reforms that are going to unlock economic potential in the economy. But unfortunately, they are not quick fixes. They require negotiations with different sectors of society, and are going to take time.
Yeah.
So we should not expect a quick turnaround in economic growth until those economic reforms are implemented, which from last year's elections to date, they've been too slow, given how complex they are. But first and foremost, we need to have electricity for South African economy to operate.
Yeah, it's a big political story, but offloading some of the SOEs might be one of those things, because bailing them out is taking money away from the fiscus and increasing our budget deficit.
Absolutely. I think that just deals with the fiscal pressure that comes from the state-owned companies. At least the putting of SAA into business rescue is a good step in that direction. But I think what is going to be quite pivotal, at least for investors, is how much more is going to be given to Eskom, is going to be given to other SOEs in the coming budget. If there is any more money that is given to them, it's a bad indication to say there is no end in sight of a support of SOEs that continue to malfunction. But I think we also need to consider that they are quite complex. They're quite pivotal for the economy. It's not something that we can just unbundle or just find a solution quickly. It takes some time. We need to be patient. But other countries have implemented economic reforms quite fast. Brazil has done it, and they have seen quite a significant surge in investment. And other countries within the African continent, by the way, are doing quite well, much better than what we are doing.
If we fix the power thing, is that 70% of the problem solved? Because it seems as if the World Bank's pretty much hinged their story on the power.
I think quite a significant portion of our growth story will be solved if we have enough power. Some of the constraints that we have, we've had them for quite some time. They are not new. But the lack of electricity, it has become quite accentuated in the past 5 to 10 years, for instance. Before that, we didn't have any energy issues. So if we have sufficient energy that is reliable, I think that's one big problem solved. But over and above that, we need to implement the economic reforms that come from National Treasury.
For some reason, the stay of execution has been prolonged for some time in terms of downgrading to full-on junk status by Moody's. Can they hold it off much longer?
Possibly not. If you look at markets, you look at bond markets, you look at currency markets, you look at CDS spread, they've already priced in a downgrade. We are trading worse than countries that are already sub-investment grade across all credit rating agencies, such that even if it happens, the impact on financial markets is likely to be muted if it happens at all. But going forward, we are likely to see an improvement. I think whether they downgrade or not will hinge on the ability of National Treasury to present a credible budget. I think it's no longer about the numbers. It's about the credibility of those numbers that is going to matter more for credit rating agencies.
Is a second recession in 2 years on the cards?
I think the talk of a recession, well, it's a two consecutive quarters of negative growth itself is also not quite helpful. If you look at unemployment rate, the highest since 2008, since the beginning of the compilation of unemployment numbers, at least by the quarterly labor force survey. If you look at the number of people, the quantum of people that don't have employment, just over 10 million people. If you look at people that depend on social grants, 17 million people, that is about a third of the population. Now, we can talk about recessions. That for me is a non-issue. Talk about these issues that I've just mentioned. Those are the issues that indicate it's an economy in a crisis. It's something that has to be fixed quick. If we don't, I think we're facing a crisis in front of us.
So other emerging markets seem to be finding their feet, even though that the global economy isn't the best that it can be. What is it about South Africa's makeup that's making us lag even behind those other emerging markets?
If you look at the growth trajectory over the past decade, a lot of our emerging markets have improved and we have lagged, as you pointed out. Part of the problem has been the business sector that has held off in investing in the economy because of uncertainty from a policy point of view. Can talk the issues of land expropriation without compensation. but also a lot of binding constraints such as electricity, which have meant that private sector investment was not growing. In actual fact, it had contracted for quite some time. And if you look in economies that grow, growth is led by the private sector, not by government. Government constitutes only about 20% of fixed investment, which is quite important for generating jobs and
theirs is
growing the
largely
economy.
to create an enabling environment.
Absolutely. Government's job is to create an enabling environment. The private sector invests to create jobs and grow the economy. So far, we haven't seen private sector investment coming to the party. But I think that's what they're waiting for, to see whether we're going to see the economic reforms.
Isaah Mhlanga, we're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, but let's hope something happens. The lights stay on as a first instance.
We just need decisions, not hope.
Exactly. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thanks for everything.